All right, we might have some folks be popping in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to April's brand meeting. Just a few quick just little reminders I'm going to put in the chat for everybody. If you would like the CEU for this session, please sign in so we have your information, and I will be emailing out that certificate today. All current brand members who have their dues paid for this year, for the 2020-2021 member year, you will get the CEU free of charge. But if you're with us now or viewing later and would like to receive the CEU, but you are not a brand member, you can pay $10 and you can submit payment via Venmo, PayPal, or mail a check to us. So I've provided all of that info in the chat. And then just a quick announcement that we're going to extend nominations for board positions for the next year. So if anyone is interested, you need to be an RD, a DTR, or you will be graduating from your internship at some point in the next member year. You could be free to nominate yourself for one of the open positions. We're especially looking for secretary and president-elect. So I've included the link to that nomination form as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, and she's requested that if you have questions, just put them in the chat and we will moderate questions at the end of her talk. But please welcome Rebecca Moore from LSU Performance Nutrition.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited to talk to you today, just kind of about the role of a performance dietitian in the world of sports, a little bit about what we do, and then kind of some details in terms of just like the nutrition side of things, what we're focusing on with the athletes and what might look interesting and a little bit different from some of the more clinical roles that RDs can have. All right, so just a little bit about me. From Iowa. I'm actually in Iowa at the moment. I had to make an unexpected road trip, so I'm back home at the moment, but I was a gymnast. That's one way I got into performance dietetics. I've always loved sports on top of having a passion for food and nutrition, so I just decided I was going to combine those two into a career. I did my undergraduate and master's both out in Utah at two different schools. And then I have been a performance dietitian in the college setting for about 5 years now. And I've worked with a ton of different teams. Currently, I have gymnastics, track, both golf teams, and beach volleyball team, which is about 170 athletes that I'm working with and trying to take care of. And they are currently all in season. So spring gets a little bit crazy, but it's fun too. So day in the life, I always kind of laugh when people ask, well, what's a typical day in the life? Because there is not a typical day in the life. In the job that I have, it is very much not, 9 to 5. Sometimes we're getting there at 6 a.m. Sometimes we're there till 9, 10 p.m. There's weekends involved. It just depends on what needs to get done. Who has lifts, who has games that day or that weekend. So it's more structured around getting the necessary work done way more than specific hours. So that makes it a little bit different. But things that do happen pretty much every single week, meetings with coaching staffs. So sometimes coaches, athletic trainers, strength and conditioning coaches want me in those meetings so that we can just coordinate care for student athletes. We have 4 full-time RDs at LSU, so we always have staff meetings and are just constantly communicating to coordinate everything. We have an athlete dining hall, so we usually meet with that staff, the chefs over there once a week, just to communicate menu changes that we might need to do, upcoming events, things that we want to roll out over there, and just extra communication with COVID this year. It's been a little crazy to accommodate feeding 500 athletes with COVID restrictions. Obviously, we have those one-on-one athlete consults. So that happens, I probably average 10 a week, but sometimes it's a lot more than that. Sometimes they're kind of scarce. And those can be quick, just like, checking in. A lot of times the athletic trainers are sending me people to work with on, hydration, energy levels, whatever needs to be going on with them, body composition changes. We do try to make it out to practices a lot, so that's just another kind of touch point for our athletes. Some of our kids do not have the personality to come and sit down with you one-on-one, so if you show up at practice, you just make yourself available to answer nutrition questions, and it gives you a better rapport with them. It shows that you actually, care how they're doing, and if you know their sports well enough, you can kind of watch a practice and tell how they're doing too. I was a gymnast, so that's obviously the easiest sport for me to watch a practice and know who's struggling and who's doing well. But I've been with my sports long enough now that I can pretty much do that. Organizing travel and home competition food needs. So this is everything from snack tables to putting together menus for pre and post game meals. Sometimes we're ordering that as well. Sometimes our director of ops are doing that for us. Just kind of depends on the team. But at the beginning of every week, you kind of just look at like, okay, who's home, who's leaving, when are they leaving, what do I need to get to them before they are leaving for their competitions. We divide up and order all of our like bars, applesauce, electrolyte products. I mean, we have massive closets of storage kind of everywhere. And we order all of that. We order all of our supplements. We are obviously vetting any supplements that an athlete wants to take that are not coming from us, but we are allowed to provide quite a few things. So we keep that all stocked and inventoried. We do have a DEXA machine, which I'll talk a bit more about later, but we do all of those tests ourselves as RDs. And then whenever we have a little bit of extra time, just continuing education for ourselves, whether it's webinars, reading research articles, whatever that looks like, because it's constantly changing. So kind of some important practice areas we deal with on a regular basis. Fueling for performance is obviously huge. So not only performance on game day or meet day, but performance on, for practice in terms of getting ready for most of our teams practice in the afternoon. So, how are we helping them through their day so that they show up for practice ready to go, ready to push themselves and improve. Hydration is massive, obviously, especially down here in Baton Rouge. It's just a whole different ball game in terms of keeping these guys hydrated. Body composition and changing that. Again, we measure that with the DEXA machine, and then we're the go-to people to do consults in terms of how do I gain muscle? How do I lean out? Whatever that looks like. If we have eating disorders or disordered eating, obviously we see that and are very involved in that. Thankfully, we also have a sports psych and counseling department at LSU, so we can tag team with them in terms of treatment. The product ordering, we do have about usually 15 to 20 undergrad student volunteers. And so we're managing that program, trying to mentor them as well as just make sure everything keeps running smoothly. They really help us keep our fueling stations going in our weight rooms. We literally could not have the manpower to do that, which is 4 people. So that's super helpful. And then we act as preceptors for dietetic interns fairly frequently. So that's another thing that we're doing a lot of. And then menu planning, which I already briefly talked about, both for the dining hall and for our individual teams. So I just wanted to throw this up here. Performance nutrition is going to look fairly different from a lot of clinical roles. And this is one place where it is very different. I remember when I went from clinicals to this job, it was like, whoa, this is a little bit different. So carbohydrate needs for athletes, usually going to be 3 to 8 grams. It can definitely go up to 12 grams per kilo, but that's more for ultra endurance athletes. And we don't have them at the college level. I have the track team, I have the distance squad, but the most they ever run is a 10K. And so that's not even really considered distance at that point in terms of the research. So 3 to 8 grams, I occasionally go lower than that if I have someone who's, injured and trying to not have their body comp go up while they're hurt. But we have mostly explosive sports, so that's a good range that encompasses most of our athletes. In terms of protein, we're usually in the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo. I'm usually on the 1.8 to 2-ish area if I'm ever actually calculating macros. We don't typically get that detailed. We do a lot more behavior-based counseling more than, here's your macro goal for the day. Just because of the attitude of our 18 to 22-year-olds, they're not gonna sit down and count grams of protein a lot of times. But that's what we as practitioners are shooting for. And then if they are going through a period of immobilization because of an injury, or if we are intentionally putting them in a calorie deficit in order to improve body comp, definitely want them more close to the 2.2 as we can get, because that typically is helpful for achieving those body composition goals and for minimizing that muscle atrophy during disuse. And then the other thing we preach big time is just spreading out your protein intake throughout the day. So you can only 20 to 30 grams ish of protein usually will maximize muscle protein synthesis in that sitting. And so we try to dose that 4 to 5 times a day, and just for better absorption and for better muscle protein synthesis. For fat, we usually start at 1 gram per kilo, and then we just adjust based on calorie needs, but that's where I usually start someone and then go from there. Obviously needed for recovery if we're choosing some of the more anti-inflammatory fat choices. And then omega-3 fatty acids, those supplements are a part of our concussion protocol. So if we ever have an athlete go into concussion protocol, we are dosing that, and that's coming from us as RDs. Just so, and a few important micros, iron and vitamin D, we get labs on quite frequently, especially for some of our more at-risk populations. So my distance runners, we do iron and vitamin D a couple times a year. We get this on all of our incoming freshmen. So this is a lot of consults every time we do labs, because then I have to sit down with everybody who needs to supplement and give them the whole, this is why you need iron speech, and this is why you need vitamin D speech, and just get them to understand why they're taking it, because they're way more likely to comply if they're understanding it, and I'm not just handing them a pill and saying you need to take this. But we look at ferritin and hemoglobin for our at-risk athletes for iron, and then we typically start supplementation when ferritin drops below 35. That's what the research indicates for an athletic population. For the vitamin D, you would be amazed how many of our athletes are low in vitamin D, or at least low compared to where we would like them to be for an athlete. So 3 biggest benefits for an athletic population of having optimized vitamin D levels: obviously bone health, we're trying to minimize that stress fracture risk. Muscle recovery, we're seeing more and more now, is linked to vitamin D levels, and as well as immune function, which in a year of COVID has been extra important. We will occasionally give calcium if we see low bone mineral density on a DEXA scan, or if I have someone who is allergic to dairy products or just super lactose intolerant and doesn't have a lot of fortified replacement foods. I will sometimes give them calcium. And then we actually give quite a bit of magnesium to help with muscle function, recovery, cramping. There isn't a ton of good research on that yet, but I can just tell you anecdotally that it works for a lot of our athletes. You also lose magnesium in sweat. And so I think that's one reason that they usually benefit from just having a little bit more. And it's not like they have these perfectly amazing diets and they're getting a ton of great natural magnesium sources, most of them. All right, so that leads us nicely into supplements. We only give supplements that are third-party tested for safety, quality, and purity. So kind of the gold standard for us is NSF certified for sport. That's our very favorite. If you see that on there, we feel pretty good about giving that supplement. Informed choice and informed sport are 2 other ones that are pretty good. And then we usually just look for the USP little symbol on the vitamins and minerals, because not a lot of those are actually tested for sports. But we want to prevent any adverse health effects. And then obviously we want to prevent positive drug tests, because we don't want people losing eligibility. So all of our athletes have to sign off when they first get to us saying, I'm not going to take anything until I talk to the RDs. And they're usually pretty good about that, because we've had I think we've drilled it into their heads and scared them enough that they actually come and ask us before they buy stuff usually. So really with supplements, more is not always better, obviously, but we are going to correct any deficiencies we find. Sometimes we'll give a little bit of zinc or vitamin D for extra immune support if we have someone that just keeps getting sick, or if they want to start taking that zinc and vitamin C like right when they feel symptoms, we'll sometimes give that. And then we stock multivitamins, quite honestly, just to give to those athletes that we haven't quite convinced to eat a great diet yet. And so it's just kind of an insurance policy to make sure that they're getting everything. Or sometimes it just is kind of a placebo effect, and I'll have an athlete ask to take a multivitamin just because they want to. And I usually say, yes, we have the gummy ones. So they like those a lot. All right, so then if you've worked with an athlete, their nutrition, their sleep, their hydration are all in a pretty good place. Some ergogenic aids that you could actually think about providing. Whey protein, we do actually give them because we put that in their post-lift smoothies. High leucine content, which is the most important amino acid for muscle protein synthesis, stimulation, and just a really absorbable protein form. So we do provide that sometimes. Creatine, we can't actually buy for them, but if they want to purchase it on their own and take it, as long as they come to me and I can teach them how to dose it properly and I make sure that they're doing everything else correctly, I'm okay with that. You can see a little bit of benefit sometimes from creatine in terms of muscle recovery, muscle growth, and we're starting to see a little bit of interesting research on creatine and concussions. So I will be interested to see where that goes in the next few years if we start actually including creatine as part of concussion protocols as well. I'm hoping that we do go that direction in the near future here, but we'll see. Collagen, we do provide to some of our athletes who just have chronic joint pain and chronic joint problems, particularly if they're coming off of a surgery and they're rehabbing from an ACL tear or an Achilles rupture or anything like that. But we've had some pretty good results with just trying to preserve joint tissue in some of our, especially like super seniors. Caffeine, we can't give that, but it's a very well studied ergogenic aid if you dose it properly and you take it properly and you are a responder. So your response to caffeine depends largely upon your genetics. Some people respond well. Some people actually go backwards in performance and they feel pretty terrible when they have caffeine. And some people are kind of in the middle. So there's you got to figure out if you're actually a good responder to caffeine, but you can take that. And then beetroot. So we give something called Beet Elite, which is really just a nitric oxide enhancer. So you can take that pre-workout and you should get a little bit of vasodilation, which improves oxygen and nutrient delivery to those working muscles. So we give that to a few of our athletes. So hydration, I mentioned, super extra important down in Baton Rouge, but we start with half to whole of the athlete's body weight in fluid ounces. That's kind of our baseline recommendation to everybody. And then we go from there. We do actually sometimes get to do some sweat testing with a few athletes, which is kind of exciting. And we can measure not only sweat rates, but sweat composition in terms of how much salt is in it. So if you get someone who is not only a heavy sweater, but also a salty sweater, that is like the worst combination possible because you're losing fluids and a ton of electrolytes. We did this on the whole beach team a couple years ago, and it blew my mind where a couple of the girls are. But it made sense because they were the ones that are always cramping on me no matter what we do. But it was helpful for me to educate them and open their minds on like, this is literally how much you're losing in a day. This is how much we need to replenish. It's kind of a chore for some of them to really get enough fluid and salt back in them. So we focus on water. Obviously, sports drinks can be used during exercise. For a lot of my athletes coming out of high school, sometimes I actually have to break their habit of just like living off of Gatorade because they think, oh, I'm an athlete, I'm supposed to drink this. But then you look at the end of the day and they just had, an extra 100 grams of sugar that they didn't need, especially if they have lean out goals. So breaking the Powerade habit sometimes is something I'm doing with my freshmen. In addition to that, other sugary beverages. So I don't see a ton of pop in this or soda. Sorry, I'm a Midwesterner, so it's pop to me, but soda in this population, but a lot of things like lemonade, sweet tea, and then all the Starbucks desserts. I don't even call it coffee, what some of them get, with the extra pumps of caramel and everything on top. Don't forget the electrolytes. So we use a variety of products, MyHigh, Drip Drop, and Right Stuff, to be able to dose electrolytes in different quantities. They're typical. 2 of the 3 I just mentioned are very palatable and easy to drink. The other one, you just kind of shoot back and deal with it because it's really awful. But it's the highest. The Right Stuff is the one that's awful, but it's the highest dose we can give them in those products, and it's effective if they're like starting to cramp. We will occasionally during preseason camps monitor pre and post practice weights as a way to monitor sweat loss, and then we can see, did they regain by the next day? Because what we don't want is that like stair step effect where they lose 3 pounds and then the next day they lose another 2 pounds and they're not regaining between practices. So we will keep an eye on that sometimes, and then we can kind of hand out like a almost like a prescription card, like, hey, you lost 3 pounds. This is how much you need to drink tonight to be ready to go for tomorrow. So just another education tool. Some schools do urine specific gravities. We do not deal with that. And I'm very thankful for it. I've done it before, but it's not fun, especially to do on a big team. So body composition, we do have a DEXA. It's a hologic, which is the picture that I threw on there. We do it about 3 times annually with our athletes. I like to do beginning of preseason, end of preseason, and then end of season, because I need to see where they're coming back to campus. So for most of my teams, this is like early September. I want to know kind of what they're reporting at. Some of them really don't take care of themselves during the summer, and they come back and you can see that. And then it's like, all right, well, I got to at least know a starting point. And then typically during the fall is where they're doing the bulk of their conditioning, just to get themselves into a good, baseline spot. And so that's where we tend to see the most change, most improvement in body composition. And then I like to look at the end of season, because depending on the team, sometimes teams will taper so much that they'll almost atrophy a little bit during season. So I just kind of like to know where everybody is at going into the off season, because the off season is another great time to make changes in body composition, if that's necessary. So the worst time is during season. So I try to preach to all of these kids, like, you got to get yourself in an awesome place fitness wise before season starts. So then you're just maintaining and you're just working on very sport specific improvements at that point. So we look for trends. I like to see where their peak body composition is in terms of peak performance. So like track coming up, I will scan them right after nationals in the middle of June. And so, we have some really good athletes this year. So in years past, I've been able to see, okay, like 2 days after you won the national championship, what's your body comp? Because then, assuming they're not a senior, we know that that's what we're kind of shooting for the next year. So we have a lot of good data in terms of what's like a good range for each sport or even each position within a sport. A lot of it's not published. A lot of it is just things that, because we've done so many scans on so many athletes at this point, there is some published football data, but that's about it at this point. And so, there will always be exceptions to the rule, and someone who's just incredibly good at their sport and you look at their body comp and it doesn't make any sense. But for the most part, there are some ranges, and I like to compare athlete to where that athlete was previously, as well as to like their teammates or what the norms would be, because that's a lot more meaningful change for them. And I like these body comp tests because it's way more correlated to performance than a scale weight. And it's much more meaningful. So we can look at total pounds of body fat and total pounds of lean mass in addition to that percentage, which is helpful as well, because most of our athletes, particularly the females, shouldn't really go below a certain amount in percentage or in pounds of body fat, or they start upping their injury risk. We see amenorrhea at that point, and that's obviously not a good thing. And then with the DEXA, we also have the added benefit of seeing bone mineral density. We usually look at the whole number as well as the Z-score, and then we can make informed decisions about, okay, is this person at higher risk for stress fractures, and what can we do about that? So injury nutrition, obviously, sadly, within sports, we get a lot of hurt athletes. One of the biggest things we're trying to do as RDs while they're recovering is to keep them out of an energy deficit, because if they were in an energy deficit, it would just prolong the healing process. But on the flip side of that, we also don't want them to put on 20 pounds. And so we have to kind of help them walk that fine line. In terms of specifics, I already talked about having that upper range of protein intake and that being really helpful. And then there's a little bit of research on omega-3s and creatine also helping with decreasing muscle mass loss during that recovery process, during that inactivity. And then managing inflammation, you can use things like tart cherry juice that we have, or other just food sources of polyphenols. You want to be careful to not knock the inflammation down too much, because that inflammation is triggering a healing response. And so you don't want to take too much of it away. But you can use that, really just, if they're getting it from foods, it's not going to be a problem. It's just when they start trying to take massive amounts of vitamin C or vitamin E or anything like that. So behavior modifications, I mentioned earlier that, we might be calculating macros, but we're not often having those conversations with our athletes. So things that we're working on a lot, I mean, this is going to sound so basic, but literally just fitting 3 meals and snacks into academics and sports. Most of these kids, their days are scheduled like to a T. They have almost zero free time. This year, I don't know if Zoom classes have made it better or worse. Theoretically, it should have made it better because they're at home and they should just be able to walk to the kitchen and grab a lunch and then sit down and eat it in their class. But at the same time, I have athletes sleeping in until 10:30 in the morning, eating one small snack at noon, and then trying to go to practice because they didn't have to be anywhere before that. So I've seen some pros and cons, but just getting creative about what they can fit in their backpack, what they're going to be close to. If they do have in-person classes or tutoring, so that they can grab food and be ready to go. Just really kind of teaching them how to think ahead and prepare so that they have what they need ready to go. Sleep, I know, is not technically nutrition, but it falls on us to do this education, and that is a part of a lot of my consults. I mean, they're college kids, so you can imagine I run into some less than ideal sleeping patterns, but for these 18 to 22-year-old athletes, 9 hours is ideal for recovery and for injury prevention. And so that's what we're trying to figure out, how to fit 9 hours again into a very busy schedule. Obviously, parties, weekends, that all factors in, especially if you're working on body composition improvement with somebody. They might do pretty great Monday through Friday, and then they might go a little crazy on Saturday. And obviously, that's going to derail some of their progress. Cooking and grocery shopping skills, you get 18-year-olds with huge range of abilities in this department. Some of them can go to the store, they know how to make a list, they can put meals together, they're totally fine. And then some of them, you're writing down, okay, if you get the rice that you can microwave and the broccoli that you can microwave and the frozen pre-cooked grilled chicken, then we can turn this into a meal. And you just have to get a little bit creative. The dining hall helps, but it's not open on the weekends. So and a lot of our athletes don't get all 3 meals a day there. So they are responsible for some of their own meals. Plus, that's just a skill I like to teach them because at some point they're going to graduate and I want them to be set up to actually feed themselves when they leave. And then stress is another thing that we deal with, and we can kind of, again, tag team with our sports psych and counseling department. So stress obviously can lead to a lot of GI distress. I get a lot of athletes usually at the end of the semester in my office trying to figure out why they're bloated and constipated. And then I ask them where their stress level is at. And then it's like this light bulb goes off that might actually be the problem. And it's not that they suddenly, have a new food allergy or intolerance. And then obviously eating to cope. So sometimes with that stress, they're turning to foods to cope with that. And then that's something else that we see in our consults sometimes. All right, so I just wanted to briefly go through the sports that I have right now, just out of interest, and talk a little bit about some of the problems that I deal with them in terms of nutrition and just some different things that makes my job really interesting because I do have so many different athletes. So track feels like having 4 or 5 teams because they practice in different groups, and the nutritional needs and the personalities of these groups are completely different. You put the distance kids next to the sprinters, and it does not look like the same team. So preseason is in the fall, except for the distance squad because they run cross country in the fall. So distance basically competes from September until June, which is pretty much the whole year at that point. The rest of the team doesn't start until January. We have a separate indoor season followed by an outdoor season. So we just made that switch in the middle of March from indoor to outdoor. There are different events between indoor and outdoor, so you have to keep track of who's running what, depending on the time of year and what meet they're doing, and then what relays they might be a part of. A big thing I do this time of year is the athletes will text me their race schedule for the day, and I will help them figure out where to fit in meals and snacks. Oftentimes they have multiple races or multiple events each day. And sometimes it's a very quick turnaround. They'll run, a 200 prelim at noon, and then they'll have maybe the 4x4 at 1:30. And so we have to figure out in between cool down and warm up, like where do they fit in a snack? Where do they fit their meals in? When I originally got here, most of the track team had the horrible habit of eating a great breakfast on meet day and then not eating another meal until they were done, even if that was like 7 o'clock at night. They would just like survive off of Z-bars and bananas for the entire day because they were scared to eat a meal. So thankfully at this point, I've got it convinced enough of them that like, if you don't run till 5, you also need to eat lunch and some snacks. And so most of them actually eat throughout the day. Now I only have a couple that are still too scared to eat or just get a really nervous stomach and feel like they can't do anything after breakfast. But for the most part, they are actually eating, thankfully, on meet days now. But common problems, dehydration, they're out there, especially outdoor season now. The heat off the track as well as from the sun, it gets really bad down there. Cramping, big thing, especially for my sprinters and jumpers can be big. Stress fracture risks, obviously more in the distance squad, but occasionally in another group. And then just body composition changes. So this is a team I meet with a ton in terms of leaning out throughout the season. Ultimately, a few of them always show up in September having not trained for 2 months and not done anything and eaten horribly. And so then we're going to have to help dig them out of a hole in the fall so that they're ready to go for season. But this is probably the sprint, throw, jump group is my leanest group that I work with. And it makes a big difference. This is a crew that is highly competitive, and 1% to 2% body composition can make a really big difference when you're only running, the 100 or the 100 hurdles. It can make a big difference. So gymnastics, they might train everything from 1 to all 4 events. So that's going to massively impact their caloric needs on a daily basis. Plus they do all of their conditioning together, typically as a team. These are very small humans, so their calorie needs are a lot smaller than what you typically see for an elite athlete. So that presents a unique challenge. How do I get enough, protein, carbs, fats in them, micronutrients, really dense, nutritious foods when they maybe only need 1,800 calories sometimes. So that can be a challenge. Also, body image. They are in a leotard at LSU. We are on national television almost every single weekend. In a year that is not COVID, the PMAX sells out with 13,000 fans. Like, it's very much an aesthetic sport. You're literally judged on how you look like, what your line looks like, in the middle of a bar routine. So very body image conscious. So I like to do some extra team talks with them just on like body positivity and team culture. And for the most part, they do a pretty good job with that. Do unfortunately see some disordered eating, fear foods. A lot of that has to do with kind of their history in club gymnastics, whether it was parents or coaches or other teammates that they kind of grew up with. I usually end up with some freshmen that come in and like are really scared of carbs or just have some really strange notions about food or are severely underfueling. Usually by the time they graduate, they're doing pretty well because we have a good supportive team culture over there. And like my seniors right now, I started with as freshmen, and they've all made massive amounts of progress in terms of just their relationship with food and seeing it as fuel and not kind of a scary thing. And then on meet days, because you're in a leotard and they don't want to feel bloated at all, or they don't want to have to go to the bathroom in between every event, they tend to be a little underfueled and a little underhydrated on meet days. And that's, again, something we kind of just have to work through with them. So beach volleyball, they might play in torrential downpours. As long as there isn't lightning, it might be 100 degrees with straight sunshine. You never know. Sometimes also it's like 50 degrees and they're in tights and sand socks and everybody's freezing. So lots of different weather factors with which change what they're hungry for, how much they drink, obviously sweat rate, caloric output to some degree. So that's just a unique thing. It happens with track some, but they can kind of hide in a shelter usually until it's their time for their race. Beach volleyball, they're just out there for hours. They will usually play 2 to 3 matches in one day, and they usually have tournaments that are at least 2 days. So that's just a crazy amount of calories burned that we're trying to get back into them. And sometimes they don't really feel like eating too much in between matches. So you have to get creative with what's palatable for them and also what doesn't melt and what can go in. I literally bought this massive toolbox that fits all of their food and electrolytes, and what has like really big tires so you can wheel it through the sand, and that goes with them to all their tournaments. So there's some really weird logistical things that you have to deal with in performance nutrition as well. So dehydration and cramping, 2 massive things, and then under fueling. Most of them are getting a little bit better about eating enough the night before and the day of competitions, but sometimes it's a challenge just from how much they play in one day. So golf, most people just look at me when I say I have golf, and they're like, what do you do with golf? So a lot of it is just general health concerns, getting them into a good body composition range, helping them with, whether it was familial high cholesterol or just eating well throughout the day to feel better. But we do see some dehydration out there. Again, Southern Louisiana, very hot. A lot of the places they're going, Arizona, Florida, again, they're going to be dehydrated. Fueling during competition. So a round of golf for them on average lasts 5 hours, and sometimes they play 2 rounds in a day. So they might get up, eat breakfast, play for 5 hours. The clubhouse will usually provide them with like a sandwich and maybe a bag of chips, and then they play another 5 hours. So they're just hungry, and we're really trying to regulate their blood sugar control, since it's such a fine motor sport and a sport also that requires a lot of focus. So trying to help them pack their bags full of stuff that's going to keep them full, provide energy, but not spike their blood sugar levels too much. And then a lot of just salty snacks to help them with that hydration piece as well. So golf gets interesting. All right, so just to wrap up, kind of like the 4 big goals I see in my niche of dietetics, just enabling athletes to eat a balanced diet for great health. So health should always come before performance, and we're lucky that most of our support staff and coaches see it that way as well. And then fueling them for optimal athletic performance. So once they're healthy, what can we fine tune to get them to be the very best athlete that they can possibly be? Teaching them nutrition skills that'll last a lifetime. That's one reason I love working with college athletes. It's because I get them as 18-year-olds with sometimes no knowledge, sometimes some really inaccurate things that have been taught to them. And hopefully by the time they graduate, I set them up to go and, lead a healthier life than they would have otherwise, with some really good skills and knowledge. I love it when they come back in a couple years and I see them at an event and, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm still doing, XYZ that you used to teach me. Or sometimes sadly, they wait until they graduate to implement anything that I taught them. And then they tell me that they feel better. I'm like, why didn't you do that when you were here? But that's another fun piece of it. And then just helping athletes develop a healthy relationship with food. So as an athlete, a lot of these kids are very type A, very perfectionist mentality, which is, beneficial to being an athlete, but can also go a little bit too far, depending on, personality type and influences that they had growing up. So just helping them find kind of that happy medium balance of, yes, I'm going to eat well most of the time, but I still am going to, go have birthday cake with my roommate because that looks good tonight and it's going to be totally fine. So finding that balance and that good, healthy relationship with food. So questions about any of it?
All right, we have some questions in the chat. So how many times a year do the athletes get blood drawn so that you know their levels?
So for some, it's just one at our pre-participation physicals, and then we can request blood work if there's like a reason. So say I have an athlete that just suddenly decides to be vegetarian out of the blue. A couple months later, I might ask for iron labs and B12, depending on how restrictive they're being. So I'm blessed in that I can ask for labs if I really want to, or sometimes athletic training will order them. But I'd say on average 1 to 2 times a year, we get blood work on athletes.
All right. So what range of body fat percentage do you recommend for athletes?
Depends very much on the sport. So generally speaking, I never want them above 30%. There's no reason that a healthy young adult should be above 30%. Whether they're a lineman on the football team or a thrower on the track team, it doesn't matter to me. They do not need to be that high, just for long-term health consequences. Technically speaking, you shouldn't on a DEXA machine go lower than 16% for a woman or lower than like 8-ish% for a guy. But I have women who are lower than 16% and are completely healthy, normal menstrual cycle, injury-free, feeling great, because they are really genetically blessed. And they also are capable of building way more muscle mass than the average woman. And keep in mind that percentage is a ratio. So they still have a good essential amount of body fat, but because their muscle mass is so high, sometimes their percentage dips down below that 16%. So as long as they're staying healthy, I'm okay with that. So to use gymnastics as an example, I usually like them between about 18 and 22%. Volleyball is probably going to be a little bit higher, kind of like low 20s. But like I have my male sprinters are like 10%. So it depends very much on obviously on the gender, but then also on the sport.
So what have been the biggest challenges during COVID-19?
Feeding quarantined athletes. So when we get tested all the time, and if we get a positive test or then close contacts, they obviously get quarantined, and then we get the lovely responsibility of feeding them the whole time they're in lockdown. So thankfully the dining hall is able to do boxed meals for us, but we have to order them and coordinate them. And for a long time we were delivering them every day. And then I'm always getting grocery lists from my athletes that are quarantined. I'm always like, okay, what do you need? And then I literally go to the store and I buy it and I deliver it. And so that has added a huge piece to our job this year's. Plus probably also just making everything single serve and sanitary, because all these kids live together, plus they practice together. So on a normal year, like, yes, we're careful, but at the same time, like, I'm willing to put out a tray of sandwiches because, it's not like that's their only contact with each other. But right now, everything has to be in like baggies and single serve and throwaway. And so that's kind of just been another logistical thing.
So what would you say is the most challenging part of your job and then the most rewarding part?
Oof. I think the most challenging part is just coordinating with that many teams. I think most of them at this point realize that I have 4 other teams, but most staff only works with one team, whether it's coaching or athletic training or strength and conditioning. And so, especially when I first got there, when they were asking for things and like wanting me to be present and at practice and travel and all these things, I don't think they fully understood that I had 170 athletes to take care of and not just their team of 20. So I think that can be difficult. Like, how do I help all of these teams semi-equally? Like, how do I divide my team, my time and work with them all? I think the most rewarding is when I get an athlete who previously was pretty resistant to wanting to do anything with nutrition, and you get a little bit of buy-in and they start to feel better, and then they just like show up in your office one day and they're like, oh my goodness, I'm doing, they suddenly are actually doing everything that you ask them to do, and they're feeling so much better and they're performing better and they're like excited about it. So I think that's the most rewarding, when you can finally convince a somewhat stubborn 20-year-old to make some improvements, and then they feel a positive change.
So what would be some tips that you would give students on how they can be gaining some more information on sports nutrition if they can't get hands-on experience right now?
Yeah, so the Gatorade Science Sports Institute has a really great website with not only like some compiled research, but also some really good like simple handouts, just in terms of learning more. CPSDA, so College Professional Sports, and College Professional Sports Dietetic Association. They also have some good handouts that are sports specific that you can actually get some really good information off of. And then that website also kind of goes through and shows you where all performance dietitians work. So within each conference, within some professional organizations like the MLB, NFL, tactical dietetics is starting to be a much larger field. So you can get an idea on there too of just like what kind of all the possibilities are if you want to work within performance.
All right, if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask if you would like. Well, I think you just covered everything, Rebecca. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to present all of this information to us. It was very, very informative. And if anyone has questions, are they free to reach out to you?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. And we'll provide that information for everybody.
Yeah, just my work email is totally fine.
Okay. If you want to enter that in the chat for everybody,
oh, sure.
that would be great. But if no one else has any other questions, we thank everybody for being here today. If you didn't get a chance to sign in, please do so. It's in the chat information, the link. And if you're an RD or DTR and would like today's CEU, just please make sure that you sign in so that we can get that information to you. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.